in 3 years. I had 20 credits at the end of my third year.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they did is, in Ohio, they were very strict. And the superintendent was Mr. Swick, S-W-I-C-K. And he got permission from the state, Columbus, Ohio, State Board of Education, to allow me to go on to Western Reserve University and take my freshman year, and then come back and graduate with my class. So what happened was that that's what happened. In other words, I went away and I left on the end of my third year. There was nothing else I could take. There was no courses offered. I went to Western Reserve, finished my first year, came back, and graduated with my class. And that's when it was a great experience, you know, and all the kids couldn't figure out how that happened. But anyway, it turned out, as after I gave this, and I gave the speech at the junior-senior prom. And as I'm leaving, I leave the platform and I'm walking up the aisle, and here's this little lady with a funny hat on her head. And she says, "Little boy, come over here." You know, and I go over to her and she says, "Do you know me?" I said, "No." She says, "Well, I'm Esther Hamilton." She says, "I'm a columnist with the Youngstown Vindicator, the big newspaper, the biggest one in the state, really." And so I wasn't, you know, I didn't know that much about, you know, so I was impressed, but not that much. So she says to me, she starts talking to me. She says, "Well, where did you learn to speak like that?" I said, "Well, I don't know. That's me." And so on and so forth. And so she says, "Well," she says, "do you mind sitting down here next to me and talking to me?" I said, "No." So I sat down and she interviewed me. The next thing I know, it's in the newspaper, and I become famous over that. That whole thing, you know, that here I am, and that my folks, you know, came from, you know, Europe, and came from Austria-Hungary, and all about my family, and so on and so forth, and what happened, and then about why I came back to speak at the class, for the class. And so she was very impressed with that. And from there on, she kept very close tabs on me. And then she kept tabs on me. When I went in the service, I didn't know it. But she would write little things in the paper, but she wouldn't come out and say that I was in espionage or intelligence or whatever. But she would say that he's in very a highly honorable position and trusted position with the United States Army, and so on and so forth. And he's in Europe, and so on and so forth. But so she kept, and that's why when I came back, and I had this idea, okay, well, I don't want to jump to that, I'll get to that travel iron business and so on and so forth. Where am I now?
So you finished your first year of college, came back.
Yeah, I came back, graduated from.
And then what did you study? You went back to college.
Then I went back, you know, I went back and and then 1940, the war came December 1941. And so then they right at that time, they interrupted my college education, and I was in, I don't know, third year or whatever it was at that time. And,
how old were you?
I was, let's see, I was probably 23, 24, something like that.
And what were you studying?
I was pre-med, medicine. So then they grabbed me and, I went to the draft, by the way, the guy that was head of the draft board, and you know that bugger, he lived right near our street, near our house. I went over to see him. I says, "Now look, I'm registered again to go back in to my freshman year. I'm in my college to go back to my college training." And he says, "Don't worry about it." He says, "We're gonna need guys like you later on in the service as doctor." So he says to me, "No, we're not gonna draft you." Well, it wasn't 4 or 5 weeks later I get my letter, draft. I was taken into the service. And now then when they were loading us on the bus, the guy says, you're the one that went to college. I got here, is your Frank Gorgie? I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, you're in charge of the group." And I got a busload of guys. They're all steel millworkers, kids, and rough and tough, you know. And I know I was the only one that had, you know, any education. Well, I was in charge of the group, and we head out from Youngstown to Columbus, Ohio. Anyway, then we have to stop, you know, and for pit stops, you know. So then they told me, they said, now if anyone, you lose anyone, you're in very serious trouble. You're answerable to the United States government, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So it started off like that, you know, with me. So then I got everybody's name, and then some guys that get, you know, they get real smart and say, I say, what's your name? You know, where do you live? Where's your home? And so on and so forth. I say, and some of them get real smart with me and say, who are you? Who do you ask us questions? I said, just answer the question. So then I felt my authority, and I got the information, and I had them on the bus, and then they get off, and then I had to check and see, you know, and I got them to Columbus. And I was so thankful that, you know, after about 5 stops, you know, and then when we got to Columbus, I mean, we got to the center. It's called induction center, you know, in Fort Hays, Columbus, Ohio. Fort Hays, H-A-Y-E-S. And what happened there was that I get off the bus and I go in, and I said, now I got a load of people that are, you know, soldiers, people that are going to be coming into the Army, and where do I take them? He says, how many you got? And I said, a busload, you know. So anyway, took them. So then he told me where to go in that building over there. So I took them over there, and I got them all registered. Got them, you know, into the various billets where they could sleep and everything. Then so I went in and I said, now where do I stay? He says, what's your name? So I told him, so, okay, you go to that building over there. So I go up there and I introduced myself, and here's this big master sergeant or first sergeant or whatever he was. I didn't know what they were. I knew nothing about the military, nothing. I never cared about it, you know. So anyway, now we've gotten, let's see, did we get into, okay.
Did they train? Did you go through training, or
okay,
were you given an assignment?
So, yeah. So what happened was that at Fitch School, I got finished with that, and then I went to Western Reserve. Now I'm drafted, right? Okay. Now we're at the induction center. Okay. When you arrive there, and we arrive there 2 or 3 in the morning, and you sit down, you take a test. I think it's an IQ test of some kind. Anyway, so then they said, okay, this is where you go, and this is where the cot where you're going to sleep. So that's where I stayed. Now, I'm there for a day, 2 days, 3 days. After there a week, I said to this sergeant, I said, listen, where am I? He said, what's your name? I said, well, I'm Frank Gorgie. He looks it up. He said, well, that's right. Why don't you? He says, I said, look, I've been here now. Aren't you going to ship me out? He says, no. I said, these guys are coming and going. They're shipping them out. He says to me, no, just go to a movie. Go down to Columbus and go to a movie. He says, so every day I'd go to a movie, you know. And finally, a new sergeant comes in. And maybe 2, 3 weeks go by. And finally, this guy says, Frank Gorgie, Frank Georgie, Frank, you know, where are you? I says, here I am. He said, where the hell have you been? Where have you been? I said, been here. He said, the other guy told me I could go to the movies. Anyway, he says to me, okay, here's what you do. He says, the commandant wants to see you. I says, the what? He said, the commandant. I said, what's he want with me? I don't know what the hell he wants with you. He says to me, he says, you better, you know, you better get your tie on, you know, look good. I said, okay. So we go down the steps and we go down to the headquarters office, and we walk in, and this guy reminded me of General Ulysses Simpson Grant. I mean, he was with the shiny boots in the World War I, very, very GI, you know. So I walk in, I says, I'm Frank Gorgie, and I understand I'm supposed to see the commandant. So he looked at me, and he wanted to faint. He just couldn't believe his ears. He says, how long have you been in? I said, just got here. I don't know too much about it. He said, do you know how to salute? I said, no. He said, you know how to say sir? I said, yeah. You know, and he said, don't say. So after he got through with me, he says, first of all, when you see somebody with a rank up here, he said, you know, he says, it might be a captain, he says, I happen to be a colonel. He says, and you salute me, and you say, sir. You understand? I said, yes, sir. He said, now salute me. And so I said, show me how. So he showed me how, so I saluted him. So anyhow, we go through this procedure. And it was very interesting, you know, that was it. He says, okay, go back up there, and he says, just stick around. I said, okay.
Were you sleeping in the barracks by
I
yourself?
still buy, no, there's a bunch of guys, but they're shipping some out and they're coming in, going out and coming in, and it was really a real mishmash, you know.
Were you scared, lonely at that time? Did you have a friend?
But what happened to me was that after I'd been there, and then after my next interview, I said to myself, about a week later, I said, man, my life is not, you know, I'm no longer in charge of my life. I knew where I was headed, I knew what I wanted, I knew where I was going, but now everybody else is making my decisions for me. You know, I mean, go here, go there, you know, it's time to go down to get something to eat and whatever, you know.
You thought you were going to go to medical school and have a nice practice and
yeah,
a nice life in Ohio?
Yeah, that's all, you know, it looks like it's all, you know, out the window. So finally, he says to me, they kept going down to see, so finally the commandant says, now tomorrow morning, a couple of guys are going to come in here. They're going to take you for a little ride. He says, for a meeting. I says, what? He says, I have no idea. He says, I have no idea. So, you know, that was it. So then the guys came the next morning. I go down, and they take me down, and I found out later that it was Columbus, Ohio, downtown. And I found out it was the old post office, a federal building. And I knew we got on an elevator because they sort of blindfolded me in the car, kept me, you know, so that I didn't know where I was going, what I was going to do. So anyhow, they took me up there, and then I look, and here's a guy with stars, you know, and there was a 3-star, a 2-star general, and I think a 1-star general, and a colonel, and 2 civilians, and they're looking at me, and it's like, you know, a counter. You know, and I'm sitting there, I'm standing there. What's your name? Frank Gordy. They asked me all kinds of questions, you know. And then it went from your name, your address, and so on and so forth, to like questions like, what's your mother's name? What's your father's name? What's your brother's name? What's your sister's name? How many, where are they from? Oh, you're what? Austrian what? Hungarian. What is that? I said, I don't know. He said, they start asking me all these idiotic questions, you know, and they're all, you know, they're very serious, but inside I'm laughing inside. I'm saying these guys are nuts. Why are they asking me all these stupid questions? Well, I went through that procedure once, twice. In other words, they ship me back, come back. I think 4 or 5 times.
Different people questioning you?
No, these same people each time. And sometimes there was maybe one added on, some taken off, you know. But they would ask me questions. Oh, and then, so the second day, they said, fill out this personal history statement. And it was at least 10 feet long, 10, 15 feet long. So I started filling it out, you know. And you know, your name, your address, where you were born, where were your mother and dad born, and you know, on and on and on. And you can't believe the detailed questions they ask you. It was insane. And this time went by. By the way, to bring you up to date on it, later on, much later, I couldn't figure out why, you know, all of this was going on. But I discovered that it was the grade that I made on that stupid exam at 2 a.m. when I got there. See, because that's what kicked it all off. Because I had no connections, you know. And they figured, this is a kid that's going to be valuable. He speaks some languages, he comes from a good family, good background. And so all of this stuff you're going through, they're investigating you all that time. See, as soon as that procedure we went through channels, and they immediately started their investigation, I'm sure, of my family, of my mother and dad and my brothers and the whole gang, you know, and when they came, whether I'm telling the truth in my personal history statement and all that stuff. So I went through all of that, you know. Okay.